Three in 5 minutes. In 5 minutes. Aha, missä se olisi? Tuossa on toi infopiste, infopoint, siitä. Yes. Yes.
Some order to sit.
Yes.
Thank you.
There are.
If I would have started here, would sit over here.
Yeah, probably.
It's always.
Okay,
Who is?
I've been trying to call people back to order, but lunch must be good. Already. We're running 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
You're here then.
Steve Oliver. Nice to meet you.
Michael,
Hey, Mike, Steve.
the right guy there.
When I was young, my presentation was almost every time the last presentation before the lunch or the last presentation of the whole day. And I thought it is a privilege to have the first presentation after the lunch, but yes, the only problem is that the audience and one panelist is missing. Okay.
Just in time, everybody.
Yes.
Hi, Steve.
So, my name is Pekka Henttu, and I'm Director General Aviation from Finnish Transport Safety Agency. And I have privilege to sit or stay on the end of round table. And we are speaking in this panel about our European regulation framework. And I'd like to thank you, all of you, 5 persons we have got here on the other side of the table, accepting the invitation to join the panel. And maybe you noticed that in Slido voting for the first panel, regulation was prioritized, and it means that in order to make the business running, the regulation should be speeded up. And yes, what about our European regulation, drone regulation, I emphasize, where we are at the moment? So-called EASA basic regulation, which defines the competence of EASA, did enter into force 9/11, interesting day of this year. And let's say the first package of drone regulation will be published on second quarter of next year, 2019. Or we all are optimistic that even more at the beginning of the year than on the second quarter. And the second package, it will include much more items like certification, licensing, and so on. It will be published for the opinion 2020. And finally, the development of use-based UTM regulatory framework will be activated also in that process, in drafting process. The lessons learned from network demonstrations are very important. And let's say 20 years we adopted common European regulation for commercial air transport. On that time, the focus was safety. In other words, we gathered all the safety experience we have got in Europe, and we took advantage of that experience. And the second goal was level playing field for European operators. Yves, at the first beginning, I would like to ask you, why do we need this drone regulation, and what was the goal?
Thank you very much, Pekka. Thank you for the question. I'm Yves Morier. I'm an advisor to the Flight Standard Director. I'm also the chairman of the Joint Authority for the Regulation of Unmanned Systems. To respond to your question, Pekka, it's in fact quite simple. We wanted to create a drone market. The member state had properly reacted to the drone phenomena when it started in 2010. However, depending on the sensibility of the country, depending on many factors, their regulations were not identical. So therefore, what was really important for us was to find a way to ensure a level playing field, allow people to move from one European country to the other, and finally, when it comes to the drone, the aircraft itself, create, in fact, a CE marking which would make the drones European, should I say. That's, I think, the biggest reason. Thank you.
And the big difference compared for when we drafted 20 years ago or 25 years ago European regulation for commercial air transport, we had a lot of experience, but in drone business, not one of us had.
Okay. Well, this is correct. In fact, we have been learning by doing, and that's why the importance of the cooperation between ourselves, the Commission, the Member State, and the stakeholder is so fundamental. We have to learn. The example of the network of demonstrators is an illustration of that idea.
Yes, thank you. And now I would ask all of you, Yves have already mentioned his position, but anyway, to others, what is your approach? What you are thinking about this regulation business in general?
Well, let me start first. I'm Michael from Intel, former Mavinci founder, so quite long time in this drone business, living through very, very special rules in separated countries, in Germany, as also all in Europe. Everything was very different, and this is also my message here. Thank you to all stakeholders. In the past, worked on a harmonization on these standards and on the regulation to avoid national regulatory skins, to make that easier in the future. And that's also my question here, and what I expect and hope, that we will have a harmonized regulation which works Europe-wide to bring Europe also from an economic perspective to a top position here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Daniel Wiegand, CEO of Lilium and founder of Lilium. And Lilium is developing the world's first entirely electric vertical takeoff and landing jet with a weight of around 2 tons, between 1 and 2 tons, and 5 passenger seats. So it's a manned aircraft, in that sense a little bit different to the classic idea of a drone, but it becomes a drone as it flies initially with pilots, but is designed in a way that it can fly autonomous, and the moment it flies autonomous, it falls into the category of a drone. I would maybe speak 2 minutes about the opportunity we are talking about here in this market, because this is basically the reason why we are all interested in opening this market and having a regulation that enables us to safely leverage that market. What I believe is that we are in the unique position right now that we are seeing that for the first time in history, aviation becomes a true consumer product. So we might say, well, we're using planes and most of us probably came here with a plane, but we're mostly using it for business, and maybe once or twice per year we are taking a passenger jet to go somewhere to the sea and have a nice set of holidays. But this technology, the electric technology, the distributed propulsion, etc., enables us to create both drones in the small sector with a multitude of uses, and large drones like the Lilium jet with manned transportation that are cheap enough and still very safe, probably safer than what we can build today, for example, in the helicopter market. And this enables us to make a service that is accessible for anyone, be it in the small drones or in the large drones. Now, speaking about regulation, I think the approach that was taken with the performance-based regulation that enables us to do innovation in this field is tremendously important for us as an industry. And I think as a company, there's probably not many companies not many companies that would profit as much as Lilium did from the performance-based regulation. We recently had the special condition for vertical takeoff and landing airplanes coming out. We not only do vertical takeoff and landing, but we do autonomy, we have an electric airplane, we have batteries on board, etc. So it's basically all new technologies what we are doing, besides of maybe the carbon fiber structure and the physics in the airplane. And this is the key enabler or the key opener that we have seen in our business history, that this performance-based regulation is existing. Although we also clearly have to say performance-based regulation doesn't mean it's the perfect straight path to certification. It means that we still have to come up with the details, with the acceptable means of compliance, etc. How do we want to show the compliance to the performance-based targets that we have to meet? And yeah, lastly but not least, I would maybe say a word on the U-Space project from Europe. I think this is also something that is tremendously helpful for us as Lilium. Although we are not building the small drones that would initially operate in this airspace, ultimately all contenders to the airspace have a very big interest in having the most efficient use of the airspace that is available, and that it becomes accessible for everyone. So ultimately, all the experience that is gathered in the U-Space conversations and test programs, and ultimately the commercial rollout of technologies in digital airspace management and perception in drones, etc. All these things will help us to gain experience and overcome this problem that we have a new technology about which no one knows at the moment how it really looks like in operation in very large numbers. We will all profit from this experience, and then it can gradually climb up the ladder to larger airplanes and other parts of the airspace, until we finally have fulfilled this vision that we are all hoping that it will come one day, where we have a fully digital airspace management, where all kinds of different air vehicles can at the same time use the same airspace, and we still have the same or a higher safety level than what we have today.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Before continuing with Steve and Christoph, I have one question I have picked up for you, Eve. is there going on certification specifications for drone design as there are, for example, for CS25 for large airplane?
Thank you, Pekka. The answer is not yet. We have developed special conditions for eVTOL, but there is also another work which is being prepared, and they both work will need to be coordinated. The JARUS is developing a CS UAS, which will address, so it is a classical drone, that is to say, drones with no people on board. So this is at the time being internally consulted in JARUS, and will be hopefully be quite soon on the public side for consultation. So it's not yet, but in good progress.
Thank you. So, Steve, your approach for regulative issues.
Yeah, thank you. So first, my name's Steve Nordland. I'm with Boeing. I run an organization called Boeing Next, where we're looking at the future of transportation. And thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I've been in the drone business so long that they weren't called drones when I got into it. It's going on about 20 years. Originally part of a startup focused on commercial miniature robotic aircraft, as we called them at the time. But because of the limitations, our product found its way to the military. I was surprised to walk into the exhibit hall today and find one of our aircraft sitting on the floor, the Scan Eagle used by the Armed Forces of the Netherlands. And out there is a vehicle that has well over 1 million flight hours. And I think that's an opportunity for us to leverage that experience, the data that we've collected, the trials and tribulations that we've had in a system like that, and how do we leverage it. What I will say is what I'm seeing is aviation is being used in ways that it's never been used before. It's being used in industries that had not considered aviation in the past, and it's really going horizontal, not vertical. And I think that opens up an entirely global market. I think the opening comments from my colleague from Lilium are exactly well said, and I'll echo a couple if you don't mind. The area of complementary regulations around the world, so we can make sure companies like his are not limited to just the European market, but really can able to attack a global market. Just like we have the opportunity for offshore developers to be able to come into the European market. So I think the complementary activity amongst the regulatory bodies around the globe is incredibly important, so that we can be as seamless as possible. All that being said, without at all sacrificing safety, and I love your words about maybe we can even increase safety. I think that's exactly the level of leadership that we need to have as an industry, and in partnership and in collaboration with regulators. It really is a chicken and an egg situation in that trying to get access to the airspace so you can develop, gather the data, get the experience, and work out the systems in a very safe manner, because it's that data that's going to be leveraged for us to shape the regulations in the right way to make sure that we carry that level of safety into the real marketplace. And that's where I think a tight collaboration between industry and the regulatory bodies really globally is incredibly important.
So thank you, Steve, and then Christoph, please.
Well, thank you, Pekka. So, Christoph Röb, I'm the Executive Director of Drone Alliance Europe. So we represent the drone service industry. What's our approach on regulation? A harmonized approach, I think, is what we want, and I think it echoes a bit the logic that you just said. I mean, we feel we need, as much as possible, one set of rules for drones all across Europe, and not 28, shall I say 27, different sets of rules. And why is that? Because large companies can always adapt. I mean, they may prefer it if it's one set of rules, but they can always adapt. But I think it's for the big majority of small companies, the SMEs. They need the scalability and the market size to have the real competitiveness and the possibilities for business. So I think there's a real real business case, and I mean Commissioner Bulc keeps repeating that, yeah, it's about creating wealth and jobs and business. So I think it's really important. So one European market, and I'm referring to you because in the same logic, it's clear. I mean, the more we have globally interoperable rules, then even more beneficial for everybody and creates even more wealth. So that logic extends there as well. So as we will see now, the implementation nationally of rules, I think it will be important that national regulators are aware of this, speak to each other, and as much as possible, keep an eye on that while having their specifics and requirements to have as much as possible one set of rules. A very important second point is what's generally called societal acceptance. And I have to say, I don't like that term acceptance. You accept a risk or an inconvenience or something. But hey, we're talking drones. We're talking something really, really cool. And we're not just talking that it's cool, there are real opportunities. So I don't think we should say societal acceptance, but we should speak maybe about social value, and that we have to generate that and justify it. So rather than asking how can we get societal acceptance, I think we should say, what can we tell people, what kind of social value is it creating, what's being done? So let's talk a story and not a fancy design for people. I think that's what's really convincing and what we should answer ourselves when we're all, be it the regulatories, the industries in this. I think that should be on the forefront of our minds. And I think a last point, I would really praise the efforts and the speed of work which is going on the regulatory side. Yes, regulators are, because of their procedures, rather slow, but I think the speed is really great. I think it's so fast and so many things are being worked on in parallel that we should maybe take moments to think about or to sort out a bit the priority, the order and the sequencing of our regulatory steps. I think that's worth doing sometimes. So we can be sure, okay, when can we create what value? It's part of that story, I think, to sort that out, that you can deliver messages to people, also ordinary people, and say, by that and that time, we will be able to do this and this for you, for your life. And then if we fulfill that promise, I think then it's another piece of a good experience also for people in terms of regulation, maybe also in general politics, and in terms of what industry brings to them. And what is that story? Let's figure that out. I mean, is it safety? Is it convenience? Is it emission reduction? Is it reduction of congestions? Is it fun that we bring to people? I think that's the kind of story we need when I say story. So that would be, in a nutshell, the approach, how we go on it.
So thank you, Christoph. Steve, your organization, as the others as well, are working very much with autonomous operations. How do you feel? Is it properly addressed in our European draft regulation and in US regulation? How do you feel?
Yeah, at this stage, and I remember when I first got involved in this industry, the first trade show that I attended with regards to unmanned systems, and it was AUVSI, if you're familiar with the trade show over in the United States. And it was probably in a conference exhibit hall, actually smaller than the one that we're in today. And if you go to that event this May, you'll notice that in the United States, they're running out of what is the largest convention center to host it. So just the enormous growth that has occurred so far. And I could see this event that is happening at Amsterdam Drone Week. What is it going to look like 10 years from now, 5 years from now? I think it can be incredibly significant. So I think the more that we can create the collaboration activities between the regulatory bodies and industry, and doing activities such as what we call test and learn. How do we get out there and actually start to find in a safe manner to go out and start addressing some of the real world problems that exist and how we solve those with a new form of aviation that we haven't used in the past. There's lots of complexities. You know, as I think about everything from urban air mobility to small package delivery to the home, whether it's in an urban environment or not, to get your head wrapped around the levels of complexity is significant. And it's not just things that are flying in the air, it's the infrastructure, it's the connected transport that has to happen, it's the societal issues, it's the acceptance of the consumer, it's the economics, it's the cybersecurity. So I think we're just starting. It really is going to be a journey. And I think there's tremendous opportunity. As I said, 5 years from now, you know, we might not be able to find a conference center large enough to hold us. But I really think it's a journey, and the more that we can create the innovation centers and the collaboration environments between us and stay open-minded of how we approach that, I think that's the way we really unlock the opportunity.
What about the others? The existing draft, and also if looking US regulations regarding autonomous operations, how do you see that? Is it serving that purpose adequately? The draft, Eve.
Perhaps just to help starting the discussion, obviously we will have to look at autonomous aircraft. I just wanted to say that in the draft that we have produced, okay, we don't agree or accept autonomous aircraft in the open category, the simplest one, but we have opened the door in the specific category for autonomous aircraft. Now, how will that be done is still further to be discussed, but the sort of idea that we put in the rule was tasks that were done by a pilot will now be done by the operator and its system. So that's a sort of very general guideline we give, so perhaps as a starting for the discussion.
Okay, and then when we are looking at the result of our voting, could we take that on the screen? It looks like that the audience is not quite, but almost pessimistic that we have these commercial autonomous operations to carry passengers could happen 28. And the most pessimistic in time-wise was 35. That was the result at the moment. But then we had a question regarding, let's say, standard scenarios. And when EASA is going to publish that, and what about cyber threat? Is it inside there?
I will start by standard scenarios. Okay, standard scenarios, we had a workshop in July this year where we developed certain ideas. We have, I would say, introduced a concept into the rule, and the idea would be to have those standard scenarios by the end of next year for discussion.
Yeah.
So we are actively working on it, because clearly for us, for the specific category, it's a key to its success, because doing systematic risk assessment could be burdensome for both authorities and the operators, and therefore the standard scenarios, if well chosen, well made, will help a lot. So it's for us, it's quite a clear priority.
Yeah. And then I have a question for all of you. Let's say current draft regulation in Europe, it's aiming more or less for technology neutral solution and wordings, which of course has a positive elements, and it is much more future resistant. In other words, it doesn't prevent technological development. What about, how do you see how successful we have been in our regulation to make it performance based.
If you talk about now about how open it is from a standardization point of view, we have on one side we have the benefit that it's very flexible for the industry to influence on standardization communities, to create standards. On the other hand, it's the disadvantage on that side is that the industry must participate in so many different standardization communities and groups, and must afford to travel there to work on that, and later these standardization authorities, they are checking you, and first you learn them what to do, right? So maybe it would be a good approach for this European audience, it's a EASA, to have a little bit more direct inputs from experts, to have, if I answer your question right here, if this was the question, to have a little bit more dedicated rules and not this very, very open flexibility and putting everything to standardization authorities.
Okay. What about Daniel? How did you see that?
I would agree and slightly disagree. So I think in general this performance-based approach is the only one that we can do. And we're all sometimes pretending at the moment that the situation we are in is completely new. Oh, now suddenly there's so much innovation and we don't have regulation for those new technologies. This is something that exists since we have regulation and since we have technology. When the first car was built, there was no regulation for cars, and the same is true for trains and for gas turbines and commercial jets with pressure cabins and everything else. And looking back into the history, the only difference, I think, is that the pace of innovation is maybe a bit faster at the moment, but this is it. So I think what we should get used to is we should have a setup that allows us to continuously innovate at the speed at which the industry is capable of innovating. There is a limit as well in the speed we can innovate, right? And if we would pose the same speed on EASA or FAA or other regulators and ask for, let's say, Brussels approval for any change, for any new innovation, this would take, first of all, forever. And it would also mean that the knowledge from the industry, who is new in this field but has still more knowledge than the regulator, who is even more new to this because they haven't done all the prototypes, etc., in a new technology, this would be partially lost if we would not leave it to the industry to come up with those standards. So I would agree on the fact that it is an investment for the industry to influence and to shape and bring our experience into those standardization groups. But I think out of all the options we have, it's by far the best one we have. Now we could say it could be helpful to have EASA moderated or FAA moderated standardization groups as well. Why not? This is basically the same setup, but it would help the regulator maybe to be closer to where the experience is gathered, etc. But you will also gather this experience in the actual certification programs and various other activities which you do. But it's an idea, but for me it's the best way of going.
Steve, what about you?
I like going after you because I just get to foot stomp a lot of things that you say, because I think we're pretty like-minded in it. But I think a performance base is a good approach. I think your comments about innovation are right on. Is that I'd go a little bit more aggressive to say it's accelerating at a rate that is incredibly high, and I think it will continue. If you look at the capital infusion that is going into this space, whether it's private equity or venture money, going into this whole area of autonomy and artificial intelligence and autonomy, it's incredible, and that's just only going to continue to fuel the change and innovation. The technology convergence, that's happening, with AI and cognitive computing, cloud computing, 5G networks, all of it is going to continue to go at a pace that is going to be incredibly fast. And I think over time, consumers are going to continue to demand in an on-demand world that things like transportation change, whether that's package transportation, whether that's human transportation. I think there's going to be a continued pressure for that change to occur. And so we have to figure out how we adapt. And so I think that's in front of us. I don't think it's going to go away. I think we can't, again, it's a very complex problem. We can't sacrifice safety in the process of all of that, but I think the more that we can be, performance-based in our approach, the more that we can be collaborative, the more that we can adapt. Look at what's happening in the car industry, and how much battery technology is advancing at an incredible rate because of what the German automotive companies are doing, because of what Tesla is doing, and all of that will play into a continued rapid pace of innovation in aerospace.
Yves, I'd have a question to you. Is that standards moderation process, if I can call it that way, that was referred to, something that the drone committee can do? Or how do you see that?
Okay, maybe thank you for that. Because it gives me also maybe the opportunity to give some views on the performance-based rules. We have started by being, I believe, quite performance-oriented. However, the discussion with member states, with the Commission has shown that also the rule needs to be enforceable. So in such a case, we need to be a little bit more detailed sometimes. So we cannot just rely on a high-level objective. The experience clearly has shown that we need to find the right balance, so that we also ensure an equal level of safety. Concerning standards, I just wanted to say what we do actually at the time being. We are very much involved into the work of the standardization bodies. We are participating into the coordination organized in Europe called EUSCG, together with many standardization bodies. We are certainly trying to participate as much as we can, for example, in EuroCAE, for example, in ASD STAN, and there try to, I would say, explain our rules so that we get the right standard. One of the difficulties when we were discussing with the standardization bodies was clearly that, okay, they were reading a text in our rule and say, okay, what do you exactly mean by safely controllable? And then we had, in fact, to give more explanation. And I believe will be an important role, because our rule will only work if we have standards.
Yes.
We can help. We are certainly motivated for that, but I will return the question to industry. It's also for you to help us and to work and provide the workforce. And that's, for me, one of a very big message. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then I like to come back to autonomous operation. Steve, autonomous operations and safety. How do you feel?
Well, I don't think you can sacrifice safety. We got to keep the level of standard as high as it is today, and the integrity of the airspace as it is today. And I think that's important for our entire transportation ecosystem. So we can't sacrifice that. And again, it comes back to the collaboration that needs to occur. There's also, right now the aerospace supply chain is tuned for the business that it serves today, which are very large commercial transport aircraft. And as you start to get into the drone business, there's a lot of manufacturing quality that needs to improve, has to get to an aviation standard to really have the level of safety that's needed for us to operate. So it really is a complex situation. I think autonomy as the core software, if you will, is advancing quite well. The rest of the system is going to need to speed up to that same level of advancement.
Okay. What about the other end of the table, autonomy and safety?
That's very important to see that together. So what I usually say, maybe some of you heard that before, is the electronic visibility. That's a very important thing, to have safety on the ground, and safety in the air. If you talk about air, the Ares class, and then so that's a big issue at the moment, that not each participant in the airspace above 100 feet or 30 meters above ground level is visible. Yeah, and We have different materials on drones, so not everything you can find on a radar, for instance, or you have whatever, you're flying through valleys or whatever. So this new environment we're working in with drones, from man-carrying systems to very small systems, flying high, having some dedicated work to do, that's something we need to have in the future, a law which requires visibility of systems flying or whatever is flying up there, that we have a technical way of sense and avoid. Not optical technical way, it's just to see it like with a transponder, things like that. That's a very important thing from my understanding, automation, safety.
And also, it is very much question, especially at the first beginning, building up the confidence of the public on those. What about, how do you see, Daniel?
So I would say it's absolutely clear that it will massively increase safety. Because if we look at today's accident rates and the causes of accidents, the amount of pilot errors, especially in general aviation, is very large. It's 60–70% of all accidents are not technical but pilot errors. And here autonomy can make a huge difference, and it might not go down to zero. Zero accidents is our old target for everyone, but it's extremely hard to achieve. But I think if we look at the commercial large passenger jets, this is already at an extremely high level and an extremely professional level of training, but even there, I think autonomy can improve the level of safety, although not in the same amount as for general aviation. Now, this is something that we have to keep in mind as our target, but it doesn't mean just because something is autonomous, it's automatically safer. So we have to make sure that we gather the experience as an industry together with the regulator and multiple players in the industry, and we have test programs and test operations and all those things that ultimately leads us to having at first maybe the same safety level and then by far better safety level that is close to perfection. And this is something that we can see in the automotive industry right now. If we take the Tesla autopilot, it might have a similar safety track record statistically like a human driver at the moment, and you can debate whether you want to release something like this or not. But if we just take a neutral technical point of view, this is already pretty good, and then the next generation will be much better than the human, and the generation after this even better. So we can see the same gradual improvement in the automotive industry, and we will see this as well in aviation. And we just have to make sure that we are not releasing something that is not mature enough, that it makes a big step of an improvement. But if we look at our human capabilities to sense and avoid things and operate in a three-dimensional room where vehicles and objects are traveling at 300, 400, 500 kilometers per hour, we are extremely limited. So the fact that we don't have much more accidents is just the low density of operations.
Good. And I would say that whenever we are adopting new technology or new procedures or whatever, we should not accept to reach at least the existing safety level, but having better one.
Yeah.
So, Christopher, how do you see autonomous operations and safety? We are now on the short final.
I would like to pick up on Daniel's not mature enough, because I think it's a very dynamic notion, or we have to see it in a dynamic context. I mean, you basically said it. I would like to spell it out a bit more explicitly. Autonomy, mature enough, that depends on the context in which you put it in. If you have the acceptable safety levels as well. If you put it in a less complex level, we may already be there to a certain extent. If you think about a far-fetched future with 10,000s of drone flights a day in an urban air environment, and think about all the detect and avoid needs there, that's a way, way, way different level of complexity for autonomous flying, but we don't need that today. So I think it's also about getting the performance level of autonomy and all the elements that come with it into the right complexity level of environment today, so it's safe and we can learn and we can build it as quickly as possible from there.
Yes.
I would fully agree on that. And what's even more important, I think, is to see that you need the ability to demonstrate it's safe. And for this, you need performance-based regulation, but also trials where you can operate something. Otherwise, we basically run in circles and we have this chicken-egg problem.
It will increase the speed of innovation
Yeah.
in that sense, if we have these
Yes.
building blocks.
And the final questions, or final question, I would like to emphasize the shorter the answer is, the more influence it has. What is your message to regulators?
Okay, how many minutes?
If you
Well-
take 10, no influence. If you take 1 minute, maybe someone.
Yeah, okay, so I come back to the beginning. So I think it's important that each stakeholder, wherever he works, on working groups, on communities, on EASA, or wherever, in JARUS, it's a very nice opportunity to work on a worldwide harmonization. It is to work on something which is holistic, having mainly the same rules and try to avoid special national regulatory skins in the certain countries. That's it.
Thank you, Michael. And Dania.
So very short, go on the track that you have chosen. I think it's a very good one. And second point, maybe it would be great to find the same flexibility in operations to do demonstrations of whatever innovation, technology, capability you see in products.
Thank you. And Steve.
I'll be short because I have to get to another event.
Yes.
But continue the collaboration and then the complementary nature across the regulatory bodies and keeping that focus.
Okay. And Christopher.
Allow BV loss. I think it will be a huge business opener. Do what it takes so we can enable BV loss. And think, maybe not talk, think value, not risk. Risk is not a fixed number either. It depends on, it's a relation, what you get and what kind of risk you access. This is why I was stressing, think value.
Thank you. And now I like to, Yves, you'd like to mention something about
30 seconds, promise. I just wanted to say, thank you for what you told us. Just wanted to say what are the priorities as perhaps I see them. First, we'll have to implement the rules that we're going to adopt, and that will be quite an exercise. Yes. Second, we'll have to be working on the certified category, which is probably necessary, in particular for urban air mobility. And the third one is to work on use space, which will be necessary when we will have much more drones in the air. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And at the end, I would like to say that make a question for all of us. Where is the safety? Is it in the regulation or is there something else? And also, I like to say that whatever we are doing, we have to accept that there will be residual risk always. So I'd like to thank you, panelists and the audience. And I noticed that not so many was sleeping during the panel. Thank you.
That's a very good question, because the safety is also not your car, it's in the behavior of the driver. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good point.
Yeah. This one, huh? Oh, you're good? Okay, I suggest we continue. My name is Joachim Lücking. I'm the head of unit for aviation safety in the European Commission. And we would like to follow up on the previous panel by focusing on tools enabling new business opportunities in drone operations. The starting point for our discussion are the proposed new implementing act and delegated act for drones. They allow for small drones operations without authorization, but within defined limitations, such as flying in VLOS only. But they also create the specific category where new opportunities may emerge because based on a risk assessment, operations including BVLOS will be approved. And in this panel, we would like to explore these business opportunities in a mix of regulators, so actually one regulator and a number of people from the business side. And I would like to start with the regulatory on the panel, so Alexander from EASA. You have been deeply involved in the development of the new rules, so tell us, how will the new regulatory framework enable drone operations and businesses, and what is still missing from your perspective?
Thank you, Joachim. I think from all what we heard up to now and the discussion I had at lunchtime as well, I think there's no doubt that the implementing and delegated acts on which we all work so hard, the Commission, EASA, the Member States and the stakeholders, are going to be a cornerstone of the development of the ever-growing market of drones in Europe. The simple reason is that the current situation has been described several times. In Europe, we have 28 countries, and currently each member state are having their own drone regulation. So if an operator wants to fly in Europe, he needs to check for each country what are the rules. It's safe, but it's not harmonized. So what will bring the implementing rules that I hope, and I believe a lot of us hope, will be adopted very soon. It's going to be normally adopted in April 2019, finger crossed, but I've got a good hope for that. So it will bring harmonization in Europe, and we heard it from the previous panel. It's what people want, it's what the industry is asking for. It's going to be performance-based, it's going to be risk-based, and this is a great achievement. We started, I think, we had the chance to start from scratch, and I think it's the appropriate approach. So we are going to have 3 categories of operation in Europe. I start to go more into the details compared to the previous panel, so let's go into the details. So we are planning to have 3 categories of operations: open, specific, certified category, all driven by the risk of the operation. So for the lower risk in the open, of course there will be some limitation, VLOS operation, 25 kilogram, blah, 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 but the operators will not have to ask for authorization. And this is a great achievement, no burden anymore on operators, on the authorities. We will have CE marking, which will create an EU market for the drones. We are addressing safety, security, privacy. There are some noise requirements as well. I think this open category is going to be really a huge relief. And then the higher the risk, then we enter the specific category. Of course, here there will be some needs for strategic, tactical mitigations, operational safety objectives, but it's the level of constraint on the operators and industry will not be as high as what manned aviation used to face in the past. For the higher risk in the certified, of course, we are going to impose the 3 elements: certification of the drone, certification of the operators, the remote pilot license. But it is what is necessary for high category, high risk operations, including transport of passengers. So those are the reasons why I believe this is really a cornerstone element of, for new drone operations in Europe.
Okay, let's test these rather positive expectations against the experiences and expectations of the business operators on the panel. And I would like to start with you, Flavien. Altametris is already today active in visual linear inspection and BVLOS. What lessons can we learn from your experience? What difficulties did you encounter when going to the market? What is still missing for you to become even more successful? What is working well?
Okay, thank you for giving me to argue about what we do with drones. So Altametris, we have started in 2012 the use of BVLOS systems. So we can argue today that BVLOS create good opportunities for infrastructure managers, but also for asset managers. So that means for railways, as Altametris do each day, but also for oil and gas, or for water, or other industry. What is important in that is that we have businesses, possible businesses, for fixed-wing BVLOS systems, as for example, if we want to analyze the vegetation, or the train lines, or the catenaries, and so on. But also with BVLOS, we can create businesses with rotary wings. So that means, for example, for a railway infrastructure, we can control each catenary pole with a BVLOS system, and we can create a really good business for us. And for that, as for all industries, to be sure that we can create a business, we need to think about economic model, but we need also to think about risk analysis. And for that, what we do based in the French experience, or the French legislator experience, but also our own experience in Altametris, when we create and when we integrate drone in the business, or in the railway business, we make some risk analysis based on 3 different points. The first one is that we want to have safe systems, to be sure that when we deploy such kind of drones, we're not creating a new risk, a high risk for the railway infrastructure. So that means we go to the manufacturers and say to them, improve such kind of parts, geofencing, and C2 control, and so on and so on. The second one is about the operation. We adapt today our way to operate depending if we are in a city, for example, or in the rural area. That means, for example, for a railway company as SNCF, today, if we do a BVLOS operation, we start from a point E to a point C, and in the middle, in point B, we can have a city. Today, it's not possible to do a BVLOS fly on it, but if we consider only making the operation in the rural area, we can have not high safe drones, but middle safe, I can say that, systems. And the second part is about how we operate it. That means the operator, that means how our people are trained, how we made the QC and QA/QC of our operation, what is the maintenance of the drone. So that means we really need to have, as it's made in the look, an approach which is quite industrial in the operation for the operator. So after that, what difficulty we missed today? The first one is about the economic model. As the legislation is not the same everywhere in Europe, but everywhere in the world, and we are here today for that, it is impossible for us to sell our knowledge in other countries. So that means we don't know where we must improve our technology. Tomorrow, thanks to the work you do in EASA and the work which is made in France, we hope that we will be able to fly in France, but we have some contact in Japan, in the US, and so on. The second one is that today, due to this trouble with the system, is that we haven't got enough reactivity. Today, a BVLOS operation could be really interesting if we are really reactive. So that means a trouble occurs somewhere, in 1 hour, we are able to fly and go to control it. Today, we need to improve this reactivity, and the new regulation will help for that. And the last one, again, I could say is the economic model, because today when we do a BVLOS flight, we are fighting with conventional aeronautics. So that means the price of an helicopter business is sometimes really low. And with a drone operation, a BVLOS drone operation, as it is not industrial now, the cost could be really high. So that cost. So we need industrialization, we need legislation, we need improvement on safety to create this new business. And when I say that, I can say also, but it is already industrial in some applications. For ourselves, we started in 2012, as I said before, and we are making something about 100 night flights a year, and for one night it's about 5 hours flights. So that means we made safety and security operations, so to avoid cable shift in the French network, nearly twice a week. So that means it is already industrial in some application. And it is because we use some technologies which come from military application. So the sensor already existing, the system for the drone is already existing, so we just use it for civil application. So there is a business, we must improve it.
Right, thanks. That's indeed a very interesting description of an industrial application that is already working well. Let me turn to Niklas. Robot aviation is also one of the early movers in the drone sphere. What are your views on the proposed rules, and what do you think should be done to enable highly automated and autonomous operations?
Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everybody. I'm Niklas Nairoth. I'm with Robot Aviation, a Norwegian company. We're focusing on long endurance fixed wings, anything from 2 to 24 hours, anything from 6 kilogram up to 200 kilograms. So we have been following this development very carefully because so far we have only been able to reach into the government market and to military markets. Although we have seen a great interest of our technology also on the commercial end. The first thing that I see as a benefit is that just like in the old days, if you have one system or one regulation for every country, we would have to have 28 different systems. So by having this continent-wide, European-wide regulations, it helps us tremendously as a manufacturer. But it also helps customers to understand they can compare different applications in different markets, statistics, how safe is this system. You can never compare if you have two different regulations. Now with the one regulation for such a large market as Europe, our statistics can become much more precise and useful for further work as well. The other thing that I see of huge value is that it does open up, although it's still very restricted, but it does open up for more possibilities. It gives a more leeway for the users. That opens up for more applications. And although it's regulated from the top, it still opens for some local regulations. I mean, Norway has completely different needs than, for instance, Greece would have. But I see a possibility to use it as a baseline and adapt it still regionally. So that's a positive thing as well. The fact that you can now get a prevailing law over local laws actually gives opportunities for small operators. I have a lot of customers that cannot go and fight against their own internal legislators. They don't want to become enemies with them, and they don't have the power. There may be two guys in a company that are busy being out flying, so they just have to adapt to all kinds of limitations and sometimes pure stupidity. It doesn't help that they point and say, hey, Norway can do this, why can't I? Now I see this becoming an opening for that, so I see a lot of good things coming out of it. The thing that I hope will work is also that we as operators, and we're manufacturers, but we're still also operating our products, that we can set our own rules a little bit more. I think that the law will now listen to the users in a better way. And as much as I see this first attempt to it actually helping the private users more than the commercials, I understand there's a necessity of doing that because the private users was the biggest threat against regulations, not following it. So now you have that under control, you can start focusing on commercial end as well. As much as I'm happy about this, I'm still missing a couple of things. The only focus right now is up to 25 kilograms, and we have a whole industry going from 25 kilograms up to 150 kilograms. And I'm very keen to see that come. But I understand things have to happen in a path and step by step as well. One advice that I see has worked very well in Norway and within our organization is that you shouldn't focus too much on the differences, manned, unmanned. You should focus on the similarities. Because once you have identified the similarities, you have the bridge for function. And you just have to fill the small differences with positive functions. But if you just look at the differences, you're going to just have a cloud of impossibilities. But focusing on the similarities is a good way forward.
All right.
So.
Thank you. Now let me turn to Jörg, who is bringing a research perspective to all this, as DLR, which he's representing, has looked into the effects of the new risk-based regulatory approach on aviation system design, in particular as regards cargo operations. And Jörg, on this basis, how will the new rules help to develop drone cargo traffic?
Okay, thank you, Joachim. When we first learned at DLR about the new EASA approach of introducing a new category called specific alongside the open and certified around 2015, we found this really fascinating because from our point of view, it completely changed the playing field, but in a good way. What we thought about is, this specific category in particular, and with something that was back then the unknown thing called the SORA. Now we know a lot more about it. With this methodology, a lot more new designs that have not been invented yet become possible. Because what we think is that the design target for these kind of vehicles changes quite a bit. When you have this, the specific category in the form of the implementing rules and the SORA and the associated standards, it becomes possible for an airplane designer to specifically tailor its aircraft design to these new needs. Give me one example. If you can take credit for a mitigation by using a parachute, an aircraft design where it is easier to fit a parachute and it's easier to guarantee the opening of the parachute in all possible situations because of a particular position where the engine is so that it cannot interfere with the parachute. As just one example, it allows you to lower the residual risk of the operation and go with a lower risk category inside specific, thus lowering the cost. In terms of cargo aircraft, we chose cargo aircraft as our toy example where we wanted to analyze these trade-offs. And what we chose was that we wanted to design unmanned cargo aircraft carrying up to 1 ton of cargo over 600 kilometers using the specific category and at the same time flying in U space, which means below 500 feet. So this is our example. And we put together a design team at DLR comprised of people and research scientists from 7 organizations inside DLR. And it's a fascinating world. We did everything from conceptual aircraft design, concept simulation. We did analysis on risk mitigation strategies, on airspace integration. And we also decided to build a scaled version of such a cargo aircraft because we wanted to experience putting it in the real world. It's a smaller version, only 150 kilos of cargo over 300 kilometers, but it follows the same logic. And so bottom line is this new regulatory framework opens a lot of opportunity for us as researchers. It's so interesting because there's so many unknowns about it, but if there's unknowns, it means is that there's a lot of questions to be answered in the future. And if some of these things actually become possible, we will see new aircraft designs that have not been invented yet, that will be cheaper than a compared manned aviation design and can do the same kind of mission for lower cost. And this is the interesting part where this might actually be a disruptive force in modern logistics. And so we could see a lot more airborne cargo operations because they make more sense economically. And this is, I think, is the greatest part about this new framework, that it gives us this new opportunity to look into those things that have not been invented yet but will be.
All right, fascinating. You mentioned two important elements of that enabling regulatory framework, and that's the SORAs and the creation of standards. I'd like to come back to the SORAs maybe a bit later, but let's look first at the standards, because we have Sergio with us from UK. So how is your view on the developments of the standards? Is industry ready to come up in due time with standards which are required in order to sort of bring the specific category to life. What's your view on this process, Sergio?
Thank you very much. Yes, the answer to your questions is quite simple. Yes, the industry is ready to provide the standards. The issue is a little bit untimely because the time has become a scarce resource currently, especially taking into consideration how the UAS industry is developing, and it was mentioned also by previous speakers. And what I want to mention that we as a standard development organization, we are a platform for the industry to speak also to the regulators because the performance-based regulation, it is an advantage for the industry to complement it with the standards, with the performance-based standards. And and I encourage all the industry to participate and to engage actively in this, because this is your chance to have your thoughts communicated to the industry on horizontal and also to the regulator on a vertical way. So how do we plan to provide this standards? We will be using like three main approaches, like coordination. We have set up a European UAS standards coordination group with the support of the European Commission and EASA, with the aim to put down in a single document all the regulatory and on one side the regulatory developments, which is based on the regulation which is planned to be approved beginning of 2019, and on the other side all the standardization developments which are currently published, ongoing or planned. So to be able to cover the whole picture. And the good thing about this is that initially it was started as a European-centric initiative document, but in the end, this rolling development plan, which is the result of this coordination group, encompasses, I think, all the developments from all around the world. I mean, so the organizations, they just come with available standards, with planned standards. We're including there. We see how these standards are mapping with the regulation and how they support the regulation. Also, another level of coordination is ongoing by internally at the EuroCAE level by the experts with other ongoing projects like research and development projects or some deployment projects. So to make use of these results of these exercises and to be able to provide validated standards in the end, and also to use efficiently the resources, not to duplicate the work or so on and so on. And one of the big benefits we've noticed, especially in the automation domain, is that the industry is looking more into military standards and how can military applications can be used in civil purposes. Another direction is the synchronization of actions. We are trying to synchronize with the regulator, with EASA, to see how we can anticipate the regulation and come on a timely and a synchronized manner and to make the standards available to the industry. We are organizing workshops. We are participating in workshops and make sure that we gather all the relevant information, all the relevant needs, because we are concentrating on the regulators' needs to make sure we provide the standards for the regulation. We are making sure we gather the industry needs to make sure that we make them come together, so they are not developing separately and into parallel systems, and then when you come to interoperability, then you don't have a result. And then we also opt for cooperation. This is, so I've looked into all the synonyms of coordination, and I think I've used all of them. The cooperation, it's at the horizontal level, and by cooperation I mean the EuroCAE has all of different memorandums of cooperation with other standardization organizations, because Commissioner Bulc used the phrase that we need global standards, And that's what we intend to. We're already working on it. We have a good cooperation with US standardization organizations. For example, as one example, the detect and avoid topic, which had in US one approach, which was a little bit different than in Europe, currently is being discussed to have a common approach on both sides of the ocean. And also there is in Asia a new UTM work was initiated. So, and of course the coordination and discussion will be conducted to make sure that there is a unique approach and we enable the global standards for the industry. And another point I would like to mention is that on how can we improve, or for example, maybe we can find a solution. I don't have one concrete or two, but somehow to make these administrative things, mechanisms a little bit easier, to see how the other parts of the world are doing. And what I mean by this is, for example, the CE marking thing, which is an additional step to have the product certified in Europe, and to develop the standards for the CE marking. In Europe, there are only the European standardization organizations who are entitled to do so. So maybe we can consider somehow to opening, of course, if it's just an idea, to opening this door to other standardization organizations.
Okay. Well, let's have a look at the question that was put to the panel on Slido. Stefan, can we have this on the screen? Or somebody else, whoever does that? No? All right, so what are the biggest enablers for developing of high volume of BVLOS operations? 53% say it's the provision of the use space, which is the theme of the next panel, so I don't want to get into this, but let's rather look at the second one, validated technical solutions, e.g. detect and avoid. So let's ask, again, the operators on the panel, Flavien, Niklas. Do you have any views on this? What is missing there? How quickly can we make technological progress in order to fill that gap?
So today we're being faced with this as a task from a lot of our customers. But there are no current standards. Some people want to overshoot it and put in a Mode S. Some people are very happy with just an ADS version of it. That's the transponder end of it. Then you have the actual see and avoid, detect and avoid aspect that many years have been discussed how it should be done. There is a lot of companies that have proposed technology, but I don't see any adaptation to trying to regulate it. I also don't think that it should be generic. I think it should be specific on what region you are operating in or what size of the vehicle and so on. And I welcome the day when we can find a solution forward, because it would make our job so much easier. In the meantime, we are adapting to any regional wishes, basically.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Flavien, Jörg, you want to comment on this?
I totally agree with what he says about we need to adapt the system to the operation and to the system because it will depend where we fly, what is the level of risk we put on it. So, but definitely we need to find solution, because to create the business again, we need to have high reactivity, and we must be integrated in the industrial system, global industrial system. So that means aerial system, but also ground system, and all initiative which will help to improve that, or as use space, will be a good solution for us to create such kind of opportunities of new jobs.
Okay, Jörg?
Well, if you look at the current drafts of the SORA, you will see that for the ARIS mitigation, for the technical mitigation requirement, there's not only one level of detect and avoid, but there's actually 3 classes in there, depending on the actual ARIS in this chunk of airspace that you're using. And I think this is interesting, because for many years we've been chasing the holy grail of a detect and avoid system that can do everything. which is still a necessity. And I think in research and the development project with industry, a lot of success has been made, but those systems are large. But for the whole drone market, we need smaller systems as well, and those new technical mitigation requirements that have now been outlined in the SORA and the SORA annexes gives us a first glimpse of what will become a reality, because now that we have actual requirements, what the technical mitigation solution for a given air risk mandates, then we can start designing something that is able to fulfill this requirement, now that we have one. And I think now it will become very important that the standard developers come up with acceptable means of how to satisfy that. But the framework has been laid out, and that's the exciting news.
All right. Well, since you mentioned the standard scenario, I think that's a good moment to bring up the most supported question from the audience, which is, when will standard scenarios be available together with supporting standards? Maybe Alexandra, you want to enlighten the audience.
Yes, no problem. First of all, I wanted to say that I was very happy to hear all the feedback from the research and the industry, because for me it proves that EASA is on track, because at the beginning I said that implementing and delegated act are a cornerstone, but the work is not finished. It's only starting. And especially for BV-loss operation, I think all the elements that EASA has identified and is already working on it have been identified. So the need for a risk assessment methodology, I'm going to repeat because I don't know if everybody knows the SORA. The SORA stands for Specific Operation Risk Assessment. It's currently being developed by GIRUS, but with the participation of the industry. And Jörg is talking a lot about it because we are both in the working group developing this. So this is a very important element. The second element is, of course, the development of standards, and we are working with you through EASA. And third element are the standard scenarios. So on this, EASA has already started to work on it. We had, I think Yves already mentioned it, I'm going to repeat. We had already a workshop in June, and since then we have tasked GIRUS to develop 2 new standard scenarios for under authorization, and those scenarios will go, are being developed at the moment, will go through GIRUS internal and external consultation process, but we plan to have them recognized as AMC, I will say Q3 next year. So rather soon after adoption of implementing and delegated act, after EASA has recognized the SORA as an acceptable means of compliance for the specific category, we will come with a standard scenario.
And maybe also a question for the others in terms of the development of the standard scenarios. Are there specific use cases which are particularly important and which should be given priority vis-a-vis others when coming up with the standard scenarios?
My experience is that it should be easier for our blue forces, for our Coast Guard and so on, to do certain environmental important missions and to do certain scenarios where there is catastrophes and so on. It should not have to wait for any regulations. It should be able to very quickly. Mm-hmm. In many countries this is possible, but not in all of them.
Okay.
If I may, because we are having a lot of this discussion in GIRUS, in EASA, with expert groups. I think what we are currently developing as standard scenario with the help of GIRUS and the industry and some member states, we are trying to standardize the practice. So the standard scenario that we have given the priority are the one for which some member states are having experience, especially in BV-loss. And I'm mainly thinking about France and Spain at the moment. There have been some famous scenarios in France, S2, S3, S4, and so on. So we are developing those scenarios in line with the SORA, but as well based on the experience of member states and based on mitigations already proposed by the operators. We are not there. I'm sorry, I've heard it as well in the, I used to work for MAN Aviation, and one of the main critiques was always to say, regulators, you're imposing, you're preventing innovation because you're not performance-based enough. And now that we have turned in a performance-based regulation, the industry is telling us, tell me what to do, because I don't know, actually I don't know what to do. But what we want to standardize through the standard scenario is based on the experience acquired by member states with operators having already proposed some mitigation for specific scenarios.
All right, then another question from the audience, which I find quite interesting. With the new focus on urban air mobility needing certified drones, will the specific category, very important for SMEs and services, face an uncertain future? So we seem to have, how shall I put it, anxiety about what will be happening in the specific category following the many flying taxis we see in the opposing hall.
But I'm sure you can answer this question.
Yeah,
no?
but
Because
I'm moderating, so please,
okay.
go ahead.
Okay, in the current draft of the Implementing Act, transport of passengers are falling under the certified category. So as soon as we talk about urban air mobility, I'm anticipating transport of passengers, so specific categories out, and it will have to follow the framework, the frame of the certified category.
No, I understood the question asking more whether the focus on urban air mobility and air taxis will basically take away attention from the specific category and, and make it more difficult to be active in that space.
Do you want to answer, Jörg?
Yeah. Well, if I would try to answer that question, I would simply say, oh no. Because let's put it this way, you haven't seen yet what the specific category is able of, and when you will see the full potential of it, you will say, yeah, it has its own merits, so it'll stay. It's my opinion.
I think that is a very good concluding remark. Indeed, the specific category is here to stay. I think we can conclude on the basis of what we heard that it also will enable BVLOS operations, but that more adaptations will need to be done in order to make that into a scalable and fully autonomous program. Those adaptations will be partly discussed in the next panel, where we'll be discussing the use space, but in the meantime, I would like you to join me in thanking the participants of this panel for the interesting discussion.
The sound is yes, the sound is starting to work. Sorry to take 30 seconds away from your coffee break, but we've got such a full program. We even want you to work during the coffee break. As mentioned earlier today, we run a small student competition in the back of the coffee breakout area. We've got 6 booths. The intention is that you vote for the most impressive display, and we will reward that a little bit tomorrow. So the vote is now open during this coffee break, so please have a look at the universities and vote for the ones you think is most interesting. I think it's in all of our interest that we stimulate the students in developing things further. Thank you, and now enjoy your coffee.
Zipline is divided into different teams. We have the flight ops, who care about pre-flighting plans, packing, loading the packages, and make sure that the plane can fly. And then we have health ops, who can work more with the people with the knowledge of the blood product.
We make order to Zipline by using SMS or by using WhatsApp.